The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a soft hiss. Ambassador Lee Hanna walked through them, her black diplomatic uniform crisp and formal against the alien architecture that surrounded her. The chamber was enormous, with curved walls that rose high above like the inside of a great shell. Hundreds of seats were arranged in circles, each one designed for a different species from across the galaxy. Hanna had walked this path many times before. For 3 long years, she had come to these sessions knowing what would happen. The same accusations. The same lectures. The same demands that humanity show restraint while their enemies showed none. She took her seat at the human delegation table, a small island of familiar technology in a sea of alien designs. Around her, delegates from dozens of worlds whispered in languages that sounded like music, static, or grinding stone. Some breathed different atmospheres and sat behind force fields. Others were so alien that Hanna could barely tell which end was their head. The Vorthak delegate was already speaking when the session began. Korth Xanax stood nearly 8 feet tall, his gray skin covered in natural armor plates that clicked when he moved. His 4 arms gestured dramatically as he spoke about human expansion into what he called contested space. The humans continue their aggressive policies, Xanax declared, his voice booming through the translation devices. They establish military bases on worlds that should remain neutral. They patrol space lanes that belong to all species. This expansion threatens the peace we have worked so hard to maintain. Hanna listened to the familiar words. She had heard them so many times that she could recite them herself. The Vorthak had been raiding human colonies for 2 years now. They would attack supply convoys, destroy research stations, and retreat to their home systems whenever human forces responded. Then they would come to the Council and claim that any human retaliation was aggressive expansion. Council mediator THYSS called the session to order. The ancient being looked like a tree that had learned to walk, with bark-like skin and leaves that grew from his shoulders. His voice was soft but carried clearly through the chamber. Today we address the recent incident at Harmony Station, THYSS announced. 5,000 human civilians were killed when the station was destroyed. The Vorthak military has claimed responsibility, stating it was an accidental targeting during training exercises. Hanna felt her hands clench into fists under the table. Harmony Station had been a research facility studying new agricultural techniques. The scientists there were working to help feed the growing human colonies. Among them had been Dr. Park Min-soo, who had been Hanna's roommate at university 20 years ago. Min-soo had 2 young children who were visiting the station for a school trip. The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life. It showed the wreckage of Harmony Station floating in space like broken toys. The metal was twisted and melted. Nothing could have survived the attack. The Vorthak delegation has expressed regret for this unfortunate accident, THYSS continued. They have agreed to pay compensation to the families of the deceased and issue a formal apology. Xanax stepped forward, his armor plates clicking. The Vorthak hegemony deeply regrets this tragic mistake. Our training exercise was conducted in space we believed to be empty. We had no knowledge that humans had built a station there without proper notification to galactic authorities. This was a lie, and everyone knew it. Harmony Station had been registered with the Council 3 years ago. Its location had been broadcast on all standard navigation channels. The Vorthak had targeted it deliberately, just as they had targeted 12 other human facilities in the past 2 years. However, Xanax continued, we must note that human military forces responded to this accident with typical aggression. They destroyed 3 Vorthak patrol ships that were investigating the incident. This escalation is exactly the kind of behavior that threatens galactic peace. Around the chamber, delegates nodded in agreement. The Selthari representative made a sound like wind through crystals that meant approval. The massive Gorvani delegate, who looked like a living mountain, rumbled his agreement deep in his chest. THYSS looked toward the human section. Ambassador Lee, the Council expects humanity's response to be measured and appropriate. The Vorthak have offered compensation and an apology. Surely this matter can be resolved through diplomatic means rather than military action. Hanna had sat through this same scene dozens of times. Different attacks, different excuses, but always the same ending. Humanity was expected to accept whatever compensation was offered and move on. They were expected to turn the other cheek while their people died. She thought about Min-soo's children. 8-year-old twins who had been excited to see their mother's work among the stars. They would never come home. The chamber waited for her response. This was the moment when she would stand and give the diplomatic speech she had prepared. She would express humanity's sadness over the loss of life while accepting the Vorthak apology. She would promise that human forces would show restraint in the future. She would be the good diplomat, the reasonable voice that kept the peace. Instead, Hannah stood slowly and looked around the chamber. She saw beings who had never lost a world to raiders. Species whose children had never been murdered and called an accident. Delegates who spoke of peace while allowing war to continue as long as it did not touch them. Her voice was quiet when she spoke, but it carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. Counselor THYSS, with respect, humanity's patience has reached its end. The whispered conversation stopped. Translation devices fell silent. Even the Gorvani's rumbling ceased. For 3 years, we have sat in this chamber and listened to excuses. We have accepted apologies that mean nothing and compensation that cannot bring back the dead. We have been told to show mercy to those who show us none. We have been asked to be the better species while our people are slaughtered. Hannah looked directly at Xanax, who had gone very still. We have forgiven raids on our colonies, attacks on our merchants, and now the murder of our researchers. Each time, we were told that restraint would bring peace. Each time, we buried our dead and tried to believe that the next attack would be the last. She paused and looked around the chamber one more time. Today, that stops. The emergency alert systems activated across 17 star systems at exactly the same moment. On New Terra, colonists stopped their work in the wheat fields to look up at the giant screens that appeared above every settlement. On Mars Station, miners put down their tools and gathered around communication terminals. On the distant world of Haven's Rest, families came out of their homes to watch the sky light up with urgent messages. President Kim Ji-ho appeared on every screen simultaneously. His face was tired and lined with the weight of leadership, but his eyes burned with determination. He sat in the war room deep beneath Seoul, surrounded by military advisors and communication equipment that connected him to every corner of human space. Citizens of humanity, he began, his voice steady and clear. Today marks the end of an era. For 50 years, our species has chosen the path of peace. We have absorbed attacks from alien raiders while the galaxy praised our restraint. We have buried our children while being lectured about appropriate responses by beings who have never lost a single world. On the mining station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Supervisor Lee Kyung-soo watched the broadcast with his crew. They had lost 3 supply ships to Vorthak raiders in the past month. Each time, Earth had told them to file diplomatic protests and wait for justice that never came. We have been told that we are the young species, the president continued. That we must prove ourselves worthy of galactic civilization by showing mercy to those who show us none. We have been expected to be better than our enemies while they are allowed to be exactly what they are. Defense Minister Park Se-young stepped into view beside the president. Her dark blue uniform bore ribbons and medals, but also visible scars on her hands and neck. She had been wounded 3 times in what the galaxy called police actions, but what humanity knew were real wars fought with one hand tied behind their back. As of this moment, Park announced, all colonial defense forces are authorized to use any means necessary to protect human lives and territory. Rules of engagement that have limited our responses are hereby suspended. Our military commanders are free to act as they see fit to defend our people. The word sent shockwaves through human space. For decades, military officers had been forced to watch their enemies escape because political concerns prevented full retaliation. They had seen comrades die because they were not allowed to pursue attackers into neutral space. They had held back their most powerful weapons because the galaxy demanded proportional response. Admiral Choi Min-ho stood on the bridge of the battleship Indomitable, humanity's most powerful warship. The massive vessel hung in space near Earth, its dark hull bristling with weapons that had never been fired at full capacity. Around him, his officers watched the president's broadcast with expressions of grim satisfaction. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving new orders from Fleet Command." Choi took the data pad and read quickly. After 30 years of military service, he had never seen orders like these. No restrictions. No limitations. No requirements to seek permission before engaging enemy targets. For the first time since he had put on the uniform, he was truly free to protect his people. "Navigation," he called out, "plot a course for Vorthak space. Maximum speed." "Sir," his executive officer asked quietly, "what are our rules of engagement?" Choi smiled for the first time in months. It was not a pleasant expression. "There are no rules anymore, Commander. We end this today." Across human space, the response was immediate. On New Shanghai, the planetary governor activated the military reserves that had been training in secret for years. On Kepler Station, shipyard workers began loading ammunition onto warships that had been designed for peace but built for war. On the frontier world of Last Hope, colonists who had been refugees from alien attacks picked up weapons and prepared to take back what had been stolen from them. The recruitment centers were overwhelmed within hours. On Earth, the line of volunteers stretched for blocks around the military headquarters in every major city. Young people who had grown up hearing stories of human restraint and alien aggression came forward eager to fight. Older citizens who had lost family members to raiders signed up for support roles. Captain Song Jiwon had been managing a small trading post on the edge of human space when Vorthak raiders destroyed her convoy 2 years ago. She had watched helplessly as they killed her crew and stole her cargo, knowing that human law prevented her from carrying the weapons that might have saved them. Now she stood in line at the recruitment center on Titan, ready to join the Colonial Defense Force. The recruitment officer asked her, "What's your motivation for enlisting?" "They killed my crew," she said simply. "And until today, I wasn't allowed to kill them back." The news spread beyond human space quickly. On the Galactic Council station, emergency sessions were called as reports flooded in of human military movements. The same species that had been praised for their restraint were suddenly mobilizing the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in generations. Council mediator THYSS tried to contact Earth directly, but his messages went unanswered. The human embassy on the council station stood empty, its staff recalled that morning. For the first time in 50 years, humanity was not asking permission or seeking approval. They were simply acting. On distant worlds, alien species that had grown comfortable raiding human settlements began to receive reports that changed everything. Human warships were moving through space without the careful, measured responses they had shown before. Human colonies were fighting back with weapons that had been hidden away for decades. Human diplomats were no longer taking meetings or accepting apologies. The galaxy had spent 50 years teaching humanity to be warriors while demanding they act like victims. Now the lesson was complete, and the student had become the teacher. The age of human patience was over. The age of human power had begun. The Vorthak border fleet had controlled the Outer Rim for 20 years. Their massive battleships patrolled the space between human colonies and alien worlds, demanding tribute from merchant vessels and attacking any who refused to pay. The fleet consisted of 4 to 7 ships, including the Fortress-class vessel Dominant Fang, which was larger than most space stations. Admiral Choi Minho watched the enemy fleet on his tactical display as the Indomitable approached. Behind his flagship came 30 human warships, their hulls dark against the stars. For years, these same ships had been forced to retreat when faced with superior numbers. Today would be different. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his communications officer announced. "Begin the attack," Choi ordered. The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. Instead of the careful, measured strikes they had used in previous encounters, they unleashed everything at once. Kinetic bombardment systems that had been hidden in their hulls for decades activated, sending streams of metal projectiles at nearly light speed toward the Vorthak ships. The Vorthak commander, war leader Threk, watched in disbelief as his shields collapsed under the assault. These were the same humans who had always retreated after token resistance. The same species that fired warning shots and offered surrender terms before attacking. "Return fire." Threk screamed, but his weapons officer was already dead, killed when a kinetic projectile punched through the bridge armor like it was paper. The Dominant Fang, pride of the Vorthak fleet, broke apart in a shower of metal and flame. Around it, smaller ships tried desperately to retreat, but human missiles were already tracking them. These were not the simple explosives the Vorthak had seen before. These missiles moved like living things, dodging defensive fire and adjusting course to follow fleeing targets. Captain Park Hyun-woo commanded the destroyer Swift Justice. He had lost his brother to a Vorthak raid 5 years ago and had been waiting for this moment ever since. His ship's AI system, freed from the restrictions that had previously limited its effectiveness, calculated firing solutions faster than any organic mind could follow. "Target the command ship trying to escape near the asteroid field," he ordered. "Target locked," his weapons officer replied. Firing. The missiles struck the fleeing Vorthak vessel amidships. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a new star being born. There would be no survivors. 4 to 7 minutes after the battle began, the space where the Vorthak border fleet had once dominated was filled only with debris and radiation. Not a single human ship had been lost. The Vorthak, who had terrorized human colonies for 2 decades, had been erased from existence. But the human fleet was not finished. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy as humanity settled old scores with species that had taken advantage of their restraint. Captain Yoon Daeho led his squadron toward Kelthani Prime, the home world of the traders who had been stealing human technology for 30 years. The Kelthani had always claimed it was cultural exchange, but humanity knew better. Every time humans developed new innovations, Kelthani merchants would appear with identical technology within months. The Kelthani defense stations orbiting their home world were impressive, covered in energy shields and armed with plasma cannons. They had never been tested in real combat because the Kelthani preferred to avoid direct confrontation. They were merchants and thieves, not warriors. "This is Captain Yoon of the Terran Defense Force," Daeho broadcast on all frequencies. "You have 60 seconds to surrender all stolen human technology and submit to occupation. This is your only warning." The Kelthani response came in the form of plasma fire directed at his ships. Daeho had expected this. The aliens had grown comfortable believing that humans would always negotiate rather than fight. "All ships, weapons free," he ordered. The human ships opened fire with weapons the Kelthani had never seen before. Particle beams that cut through their shields like a knife through cloth. Electromagnetic pulses that shut down their computers and left their stations defenseless. Within minutes, the orbital defenses were gone. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a surrender signal from the planet's surface." Broadcasted across subspace, Daeho ordered. "Let the galaxy know what happens when you steal from humanity." On the frontier world of New Sol, Commander Shin Mirai was leading a very different kind of operation. The Gorvani raiders had been taking human prisoners for years, selling them as slaves in markets across the Outer Rim. The Galactic Council had always claimed they could not interfere with internal Gorvani affairs, but humanity was no longer asking permission. Mirai's troops moved through the slave compounds with deadly efficiency. These were not the careful peacekeepers who had tried to minimize casualties in previous operations. These were soldiers who had watched their people suffer while being told to show restraint to their captors. Building cleared, Sergeant Kim Tae-hyung reported over the comm 37 human prisoners recovered. No Gorvani survivors. The Gorvani slavers had expected the same limited response they had always received from human forces. Instead, they found troops who fought with the cold fury of people who had been held back too long. Every slaver who had profited from human suffering paid with their life. Meanwhile, on the Galactic Council station, emergency meetings were being held around the clock. Representatives from dozens of species demanded that Earth be contacted and ordered to stop their military actions. Council mediator THYSS tried repeatedly to reach human officials, but his calls went unanswered. The human embassy stood empty, its staff recalled to Earth. For the first time in the Council's history, a member species was completely ignoring their authority. "We must send a fleet to force them to negotiate," declared the Selthari representative. "With what ships?" asked the Zentoran delegate. "Half our member species are reporting attacks on their territory. The humans appear to be settling every grievance they have accumulated over the past 50 years." The reports coming in painted a terrifying picture. Human forces were not just defending themselves anymore. They were actively hunting down every species that had wronged them. Pirates who had raided human convoys found their bases destroyed. Corporations that had cheated human traders saw their assets seized. Governments that had ignored crimes against human citizens watched their worlds burn. Most frightening of all were the weapons humanity was now deploying. For decades, they had claimed to be a peaceful species with limited military capability. Now the galaxy was seeing the truth. Kinetic bombardment systems that could crack planets. AI-controlled fleets that moved within human precision. Soldiers who fought with a discipline and ruthlessness that no alien species could match. The galaxy had spent 50 years teaching humanity to be warriors while demanding they act like victims. Now the lesson was complete, and the teacher had become the enemy. General Han Yujin stood in the command center aboard the battleship Retribution, watching holographic displays that showed human fleets moving across the galaxy like a spreading storm. What had started as retaliation against the Vorthak had grown into something much larger. Humanity was no longer just defending itself, it was collecting on 50 years of unpaid debts. "General," his aide reported, "the strike force has reached Nexary space. They're requesting permission to begin the operation." Han nodded grimly. The Nexary consortium had been a thorn in humanity's side for decades. They controlled trade routes between human colonies and the galactic core, charging excessive fees and delaying critical supplies. When human merchants complained, the Nexary claimed it was simply business. When human colonies suffered because medical supplies were delayed, the consortium expressed polite regret and continued their practices. 3 years ago, the delays had cost lives on the mining world of New Busan. A plague had broken out among the workers, but Nexri bureaucracy had held up shipments of medicine for 6 weeks while they demanded additional fees. 2,000 miners had died waiting for treatment that should have arrived in days. "Tell Captain Kim to proceed," Han ordered. No warnings this time. The Nexri had built their empire on the assumption that other species would always negotiate rather than fight. Their massive commercial stations were protected by shields and defensive platforms, but these had never been tested against a determined military assault. They were designed to discourage pirates, not to fight a real war. Captain Kim Min-sok commanded the heavy cruiser Vengeance as it approached the primary Nexri trading hub. The station was enormous, home to over 1 million beings from dozens of species. It controlled commerce for 3 entire star systems and generated more wealth than some planetary governments. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the station is hailing us. They're demanding we state our business." "Tell them we're here to collect payment," Kim replied. "With interest." The Nexri station manager, a creature that looked like a giant insect made of gold and chrome, appeared on the communication screen. Its compound eyes reflected the bridge lights as it spoke in the clicking language of its species. "Human vessel, you are in violation of consortium space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of commercial law." Kim almost smiled. Commercial law. Even now, facing a battleship armed with weapons that could crack their station in half, the Nexri thought this was about business negotiations. "Station Manager Clickfax," Kim said, using the creature's name from intelligence files, "for 30 years, your consortium has profited from human suffering. You have delayed medical supplies, overcharged for basic necessities, and treated our people as sources of income rather than living beings. Today, that ends." The station's defensive platforms began charging their weapons, but they were too slow. Human ships had been designed for war, not commerce. The Vengeance's main gun spoke first, sending streams of plasma into the station's shield generators. Around the massive structure, 6 human destroyers moved into attack positions, their missile tubes already loaded and ready. The battle was over in minutes. The Nexri defenses, built to intimidate rather than protect, crumbled under focused military assault. The station itself remained intact. Kim's orders were to capture, not destroy, but its ability to resist was gone. "All Nexri vessels in the system are surrendering," his communications officer reported. "We're receiving similar reports from the other 5 trading hubs." The Nexri consortium, which had controlled interstellar commerce for 2 centuries, had ceased to exist. Their trade routes were now under human control, their stations occupied by human marines, their profits flowing to human colonies that had been exploited for decades. Meanwhile, in the Outer Rim, Captain Osumin was solving a problem that had plagued the galaxy for generations. Zephyrian pirates had operated in the lawless space beyond the major trade routes for over a century. They raided merchant convoys, captured ships for ransom, and disappeared into asteroid fields that were too dangerous for most species to follow. The Galactic Council had declared piracy illegal, of course, but enforcement was another matter. The pirates moved too quickly, hid too well, and knew the local space better than any pursuing force. Whenever a species complained about losses, the Council would express sympathy and promise to address the situation through appropriate channels. Sumin had lost her first command to Zephyrian pirates 8 years ago. Her cargo ship had been carrying supplies to a new human colony when raiders overwhelmed her small escort. She had watched helplessly as they killed her crew and stole her cargo, leaving her adrift in space until a rescue ship found her 3 days later. "Captain," her navigator reported, "we've located the primary pirate base. It's hidden inside the Maelstrom asteroid field, just as intelligence predicted." The Maelstrom was a nightmare of spinning rocks and gravitational anomalies that had destroyed hundreds of ships over the years. Most species considered it impassable, which was exactly why the pirates had chosen it as their headquarters. "Take us in," Sumin ordered. "Full speed." Her task force consisted of 12 ships specifically modified for operations in dangerous space. Human engineers had spent months preparing for this mission, installing additional shielding and navigation systems that could handle the asteroid field's unique hazards. The pirates had grown comfortable in their supposedly impregnable fortress. They had raided with impunity for generations, confident that no military force would risk the Maelstrom's dangers to reach them. They were wrong. Sumin's ships moved through the asteroid field like predators, their advanced sensors tracking pirate vessels that tried desperately to escape. The raiders who had terrorized merchant shipping for a century found themselves hunted through their own territory by an enemy that refused to be deterred by obstacles. "Base destroyed," her weapons officer reported as the last pirate stronghold vanished in a ball of fire. "All hostile contacts eliminated." 3 days. The problem that had plagued the galaxy for generations had been solved in 3 days by a species that the Council had always told to be patient and work through proper channels. From her flagship at the edge of Nexary space, Admiral Lee Naeong received reports from across the galaxy. 17 different species had filed formal protests with the Galactic Council, demanding that humanity be forced to stop their military actions. 12 others had sent secret communications offering immediate reparations and peace treaties. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving an urgent message from the THYSS coalition. They're requesting immediate ceasefire negotiations." Lee Naeong looked at the tactical display showing human fleets in motion across known space. Each fleet was settling a different score, addressing a different injustice that had been ignored for too long. "Tell them we'll consider it," she replied coldly. "After we finish with the Nexary." The galaxy was finally learning the difference between mercy and weakness, a lesson being written in burning ships and fallen empires across the stars. The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with the same soft hiss they always had, but everything else had changed. Ambassador Lee Hanna walked through them for the first time in 8 months, her footsteps echoing in a space that had once buzzed with the voices of hundreds of delegates from across the galaxy. The Great Hall was mostly empty now. Where once there had been representatives from over 200 species, fewer than half that number remained. Empty seats marked where the Vorthak delegation had once sat before their civilization had been reduced to scattered refugees. The Nexary Consortium's golden chairs sat vacant after their commercial empire had crumbled in a matter of weeks. The Kelthani trading block section was dark and silent. Hannah wore the same black diplomatic uniform she had always worn, but she carried herself differently now. Gone was the careful posture of someone who had spent years apologizing for her species' existence. In its place was the confident bearing of a representative whose words carried the weight of the galaxy's most powerful military force. The surviving delegates watched her approach the central podium with expressions ranging from fear to barely concealed hostility. These were the species that had learned it quickly enough to stop their aggression against humanity, or those who had never been enemies to begin with. They had watched in horror as their former colleagues disappeared from galactic politics, their governments either destroyed or forced into hiding. Council mediator THYSS stood at his ancient podium, but he was not the same being who had presided over the sessions 8 months ago. That THYSS had resigned in disgrace after humanity's first military strikes. This was the 4th mediator to hold the position since humanity had stopped asking permission for their actions. The previous 3 had all quit rather than face the impossible task of controlling a species that no longer recognized the Council's authority. "Ambassador Lee," the new THYSS said, his tree-like voice carefully neutral. "The Council welcomes your return to these chambers. We hope this signals humanity's willingness to resume normal diplomatic relations." Hannah looked around the half-empty hall before responding. She could see fear in many of the alien faces watching her. These beings had grown comfortable in a galaxy where humanity absorbed punishment and asked politely for justice that never came. Now they lived in a universe where human fleets moved freely through space, settling accounts that had been building for decades. "The galaxy appears remarkably peaceful these days," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite speaking at normal volume. "Piracy in the Outer Rim has completely stopped. Trade route disputes have mysteriously resolved themselves. Border conflicts seem to have ended overnight. How interesting that this happened once humanity stopped forgiving those who mistook our mercy for weakness." The Selthari delegate, whose species had wisely remained neutral throughout humanity's campaign, made a sound like wind chimes that indicated nervous agreement. The massive Gorvani representative, whose people had quickly released all human prisoners once the shooting started, remained carefully silent. "Ambassador," the THYSS mediator said, clearing his throat nervously, "the Council seeks to discuss terms for renewed diplomatic cooperation. Many member species wish to establish formal peace treaties with humanity and address any outstanding grievances through proper channels." Hannah smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. For 8 months, she had watched reports from across the galaxy as human forces systematically addressed every crime, every insult, every act of aggression that had gone unpunished during humanity's years of restraint. The species sitting before her now were the survivors, those who had been smart enough to surrender quickly or wise enough to never make humanity their enemy. "Terms are simple," she said. "Humanity will live peacefully with those who offer the same. We will trade fairly with honest partners. We will show mercy to those who have earned it through their actions, not their words." She paused and looked directly at several delegates who had once voted to censure humanity while ignoring crimes against human colonies. "But we will never again apologize for refusing to be victims. We will never again accept that other species have the right to harm us simply because we chose not to retaliate immediately. The galaxy taught us to be warriors over 50 years of abuse. Now you must live with the warriors you created. The chamber remained silent. Many of the delegates had seen the reports from human military operations. They knew what had happened to species that had continued their aggression after humanity stopped showing restraint. The Vorthak border fleet had been destroyed in less than an hour. The Kelthani trading empire had collapsed in days. Pirate organizations that had operated for centuries had been eliminated so thoroughly that not even their names survived. The Council has always valued diplomatic solutions, the THYSS mediator said carefully. Surely there is room for negotiation and compromise in establishing new relationships. There is, Hannah agreed. But understand that humanity no longer negotiates from a position of weakness. We do not beg for justice or ask permission to defend ourselves. Any species that wishes peaceful relations with humanity may have them. Any species that chooses to be our enemy will discover what happened to the others. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at the assembled delegates. Some of you remember the old humanity. The species that absorbed attacks and asked for diplomatic solutions. The people who showed mercy to enemies who showed them none. That humanity died at Harmony Station, along with 5,000 innocent civilians who were murdered and called an accident. Her voice grew colder. The new humanity is what you see before you. We are still capable of peace, still willing to trade and cooperate with honest partners. But we will never again be anyone's victim. The day humanity stopped pardoning was the day this galaxy found balance. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps the only sound in the massive chamber. Some of you survived the lesson. Consider yourselves fortunate. As the doors closed behind her, the remaining delegates sat in silence. They were looking at the ruins of the old galactic order, where humanity had been expected to absorb punishment and show restraint while others acted without consequence. That age was over. The new age belonged to a humanity that had learned to bare its teeth.